Hey, what's going on? Stephen Platinum, your friend in wrestling, taking a look at chapter 6 of the Young Bucks book, Killing the Business from the Backyards to the Big Leagues. So chapter 5, which was done by Matt, I was a huge fan of. It was my favorite chapter to date. And this one's chapter 6, called Extra Talent by Nick. And I think Nick has gotten right back in the swing. Again, you can just feel it. It's an exciting part in their careers when they're just making it. And so this chapter concludes with them getting extra work with the WWE and all the lessons they find out. But as great as that is, I think the rest of it is just as good, if not better. So we've already gotten to know Matt quite well and his relationship with Dawn. Now we get a little bit about a relationship hintings with Nick, with this woman that he meets named Crystal, who is, I guess it's a theme park, and she's giving out the prizes if you hand in the tickets. Like it's skee ball and things like that. So he just touches on that briefly. Apparently it's going to come up later. But we're talking about PWG now, and the hilarity of putting things in time that this book does so well. It's 2007, and they get a MySpace message. Let me say that again. A MySpace message saying from Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, saying if you were available to wrestle on the show. That really took me back, because I remember when messages were passed back and forth on MySpace to get things done in wrestling, which sounds ludicrous. I'm sure both of my kids would go like, MySpace, what that? And yeah. So he goes in a brief thing talking about the importance of Pro Wrestling Guerrilla and how they had the reputation amongst hardcore fans as well as the boys. And both of those things are equally important, especially in the modern game, let me tell you. Wrestling for the right promotions that the other boys talk about is pivotal. The Young Bucks clearly understand that. And again, keeps bringing up the fact that it's Matt who made sure that they didn't get booked, because Super Dragon, who booked PWG, had that encounter with Matt and Nick when they were younger, where Matt sort of acted like a jerk while he was being trained. Still important lessons to learn for young wrestlers, right? You want to have your own identity. To paraphrase Full Metal Jacket, right? They're not making robots, they're making Marines. So they expect you to be human. At the same time, you got to be respectful, you got to be mindful of how you appear to other people. But they get there to Burbank, and I thought it was just great little details. Nick really does have a knack of knowing what you're likely thinking and talking about it. So when he says Burbank, that immediately triggers in anybody who's of a certain age. Okay, why do I know that city, Burbank? And he goes like, oh, it was place that hosted the Tonight Show. It's like, cool. And he describes the horrible traffic that they encounter when they get there. Human Tornado, who is a super nice guy, and he tells them about time you all booked. And I love that Nick takes us into their mind of like, that gave us some confidence here. They go briefly into Pro Wrestling Guerrilla and the talent that went through there. El Generico, Kevin Steen, Bryan Danielson, Tyler Black, all that stuff, right? But they knew that they were going to have to dazzle the audience. Keep in mind, at this point, 2007, DVDs were still a big deal. And so Pro Wrestling Guerrilla had the most sought out DVDs in the country. In fact, they were even available in stores, I remember, which I think Nick talks about. And I remember that being a really big deal of like, oh my God, I can go into Best Buy and get a Pro Wrestling Guerrilla show. It just seemed unbelievable to me. Though it was very inspirational to me. I was like, someday I'm going to get PCW DVDs in the store as well. I remember thinking at that time. So he talks about the match and how the people that they're supposed to wrestle had done a show on the East Coast the night before, and they were getting delayed, and so they weren't able to work out their match in advance, as was the custom, especially at Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, where you're going to do a lot of complicated stuff. So they got a hold of them on the phone, and they had to work out this stuff over the phone as they were driving to the show. Scott lost, luckily. He was the most experienced of the group. He took the lead, told them exactly what they're supposed to do, but they're obviously very nervous about it. And but I remember thinking that this part was really cool, and this shows that when you get to have some experience and be a real pro, is they were super nervous leading into this. They were very conscious of how to appeal to the audience. I think entering the ring to bop to show the audience there at Pro Wrestling Guerrilla that they had a sense of humor about themselves was very smart. And I love this part where Nick talks about, this is what we do every weekend. We're ready for it. And feeling confident once they were going. They obviously had a really great match and were booked from there on in. That's awesome. They talked about an experience of booking Marty Jannetty of the Midnight Rockers, or the Rockers, and how that led to a friendship. And this made me think of my own career, where I had run-ins, because I wrestled mostly older wrestlers, and then how great they could be, and how great Marty was with them, and sort of talking shop with them, and how he respected what they wanted to do, how they got gear so they could look like Marty Jannetty, but then he just showed up in basketball shorts and a shirt, but he put on some tassels for them. They had a good show at a high school gym, and then they remained friends afterwards, which led to, him saying, "You guys are the new generation rockers," which definitely has influenced the sort of Bucks style and aesthetic and wrestling style. So I thought that was really cool that they're dropping little hints about these are the things that help define and shape us. There's a lot of discussion here about Dragon's Gate and how they got booked into Dragon's Gate, and how excited they were about that. And especially when they hit their move called More Bang for Your Buck, which again, if you look on the inside cover, they tell you what that is and show you what it looks like and pictures and that kind of thing. So they got to go wrestle at Dragon's Gate against two of the most prominent people that they had there, a tag team. Sorry, you might see my kid in the background swimming. It's Florida, living that Florida life, boy. Right. And but they didn't have, I like that he owned up to the fact that the match wasn't what they wanted it to be. So the match was fine, but certainly not a home run. The crowd seemed tired, and there were a few hiccups during some of the high spots. Wrestling someone who didn't speak the same language proved to be difficult and something we'd need to adjust to, so they're learning, right? There were awkward moments where they wanted me to fight back, but didn't know how to communicate that to me in the ring, so the match had long stretches of time where nothing happened. In an incredibly embarrassing moment, Matt misjudged where Doy was lying on the mat and came off the top rope with a leg drop, completely missing him. Matt still can't watch that on tape to this day. Despite the couple of mishaps, they seem impressed, assuring us the next time we'd wrestled in Japan, it would be better. And indeed it would be. Then Nick has this really honest moment where he talks about Marty Jannetty. And if you talk to really anybody, but especially old wrestlers, sometimes they get sort of lost into themselves, and they're so used to being sort of carny hustlers that they bullshit you. And I thought he handled this in a really great way. Marty sometimes told us stories that we couldn't tell if they were fiction or non-fiction. Oftentimes he was a hero who stood up to the bully wrestler. Other times he pulled off an impossible prank that made him sound like the cleverest man alive. I thought that was a really diplomatic way and an honest way of saying that, like, Marty was kind of full of shit, right? But they were going to get this extra work in California in the Anaheim Pond. And Marty said he would call Shawn Michaels, who was his tag team partner, and have him look out for them, take care of them. And sure enough, they get to, at catering, they get to go over and they get waved over to sit with Shawn Michaels, who really puts them over, takes them over to Sergeant Slaughter, who worked in payroll. Please pay these guys. If they need a hotel, please get them when they're needed for tomorrow. And so Shawn makes sure they're booked, makes sure he takes care of them, talks to them about, like, give these guys a match, take a look at them, Johnny, and all this kind of stuff, Johnny Ace. And this really takes me back to, like, oh yeah, those were the guys that did this job and that job. And it was weird to see them say they were paying in cash, because they didn't even pay me in cash, and that was in like 2001, and it was more than I got paid anyway. And I guess the next night on SmackDown, Matt ended up wrestling Chuck Palumbo in a quick squash. But they made him wrestle in another like local wrestler's spandex green trunks because their gear was too flashy. Now that definitely holds water. I remember the shock of having to wrestle under my real name and wear wrestling tights and boots for the first time because I never did before, but I had to. This was like in 2000. Anyway, super cool. He was excited. Matt was excited he was on TV, but of course it wasn't what he'd sort of fantasized about. But the one thing that it taught them I thought was really cool, and this is how the chapter ends. I felt like I was having an identity crisis. I was always the kid in school who would one day grow up and headline WrestleMania. It was all that I ever dreamed of. And now I wondered if that was still something I wanted. Interesting. But I allowed myself to think more short term. We had a trip to Japan to prepare for, and that thrilled us. If WWE possibly wasn't the end goal, maybe we could find success elsewhere. So they're already getting in their heads that maybe WWE wasn't the place for them, which to some people would sound shocking. But my own experience with this was Davey Richards, who was getting NXT stuff with Eddie when they were doing the American Wolves. And they were getting a bit of a push in NXT, but he decided that Impact was more for him. And to me, it seemed unbelievable. And I remember saying to him, isn't it your dream to work at WrestleMania? And he went, I'm older now. I have different goals. I don't want this to consume my life. He wanted a quality of life thing. And he knew at the WWE that was your life. So really fascinating, great stuff. Looking forward to the next chapter. Again, the Young Bucks book continues to deliver. And as they get more and more into their pro wrestling career, it just gets better and better. This was my favorite chapter that Nick has done, for sure. Anyway.
I found this toy plating the pool, and I thought it was a type of crab. Can you believe how low America stoops, leaving toys in pools? Honestly, this is a pretty cool toy. I'm going to keep it. I'm just going to put it right next to my game. Okay, goodbye.
This has been Stephen Platinum.